Already. Hello everyone, my name is Yi. I'm the host for tonight's program. I hope everyone is fine and safe, avoid going out or roaming around. Always remember to wash your hands and avoid touching your face. Most importantly, stay at home. These broadcasts are brought to you by our fellow JPO members and some of the world's greatest musicians that wishes to share their knowledge and help aspiring musicians through their musical journey. We are also providing opportunities for everyone with different interests to learn not performance but transferable life skills. We are doing this series of program because JPO think this will be able to help in uplifting the spirit of everyone in this long period of lockdown. So please help us do the polling, and if you have any questions to ask, please type them right in the Q&A below. JPO are indeed very honored to be able to invite Fintan Murphy as our special guest for tonight. Born in Melbourne, Fintan completed further study in Cologne with Helfried Pfister, Christoph Poppen, and the Amadeus Quartet. He completed his master's degree with Robert Gerle in Washington, D.C., a member of the Melbourne Symphony for many years. Fintan now performs as a recitalist and a chamber musician. Fintan's research focuses on string pedagogy and his violin bow technique, violin left hand, and Szewczyk Opus 3, which have been reviewed in journals such as The Strat, Stringendo, and The American String Teacher. Fintan has edited 8 books of graded violin repertoire for the Australian Music Examinations Board and published peer-reviewed articles in the British, the Australian, and the international journals of music education. Fintan is the chair of the Specialist Examining Panel for Strings for the Australian Music Examination Board and directs the Melbourne String Ensemble, a youth orchestra specializing in small ensemble repertoire and chamber music for strings. He has worked as a guest conductor and soloist with many youth orchestras in Europe. Fintan currently teaches at the Victorian College of the Arts Secondary School and Melbourne University. So everyone, let us welcome Mr. Fintan Murphy.
Hi, thank you.
Hello, hello. Hello,
Pleasure to
Mr.
be here,
Murphy.
everybody.
It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Uh,
So, could you share more about the video we have watched just now?
sure, it's interesting listening to your introduction talking about the Melbourne String Ensemble because that was the Melbourne String Ensemble. But it wasn't a small work or a chamber work, it's a very large work. It's about 35 minutes, a very intense late romantic
Wow.
work. Well, for me, it's very interesting. The group is mainly teenagers. There are a few university students in there, mainly from Melbourne.
Oh,
Um, and this concert was when we went to, we're very lucky to be able to tour in non-pandemic times. We tour, and that was a concert in a wonderful hall in Zurich. One of the great things about touring is we get a chance to play in some very wonderful concert halls. We have some here in Australia, but not that many. But
oh,
so that was a concert in Zurich, but it's a very large work, and for me it's very interesting because to begin with, the students weren't at all interested in it. They didn't like it. They found it very difficult to listen to. It was too chromatic. But I sometimes you just make a call on these things. Okay, we're doing it, and we're doing it on tour. And after about 8 weeks, it probably took about that long, they really began to enjoy it. And for some of them, it was their favorite piece that they'd done for
wow,
many, many years. So it's a wonderful work, a wonderful thing to do. Yeah.
wow. That's nice to hear. So, how has the pandemic been in Melbourne, and have you been able to work?
Yes, we're very lucky. My wife is a cellist. She's still with the Melbourne Symphony. She hasn't been able to work at all. All performance has kind of come to a halt. Australia overall has been very, very lucky. Melbourne hasn't been quite so lucky. We've been in lockdown for about 3 months. We're just coming out now. We're doing very well again now. But I've been lucky in that we've been able to work. I've been working on Zoom. As we know, it's very tough on the body. It's tough working towards a screen. You're always
Yes.
trying to engage the student, and that's got
Yes.
its own difficulties. But actually, for some students, it's a wonderful tool, and it's been very interesting to see how some students have actually done better on Zoom.
Yeah.
So I've been working online for many decades, actually. I used to
Oh,
travel a lot to Malaysia and Indonesia and Thailand in the 90s, a long time ago.
wow.
And ever since then, I've worked a certain amount on Skype to begin with, and now on Zoom. So to me, it's been quite a fruitful time, and it's definitely appreciated by the students.
Wow. Okay, so the topic talks about high quality music education for all. So why is this important to you?
Um, well, especially in times like this, in times of great difficulty for many people. There's a lot of difficulty. Let's just talk about teenagers to begin with, but it's difficult for the whole society. But teenagers, young adults that have this need to socialize, to mix together, and they express they're working out all sorts of emotional issues at that time, and to be basically on the computer all day at home, it's difficult. And music, of course, is our first language. Music is our primary way of expressing emotion. So it's been
Yes.
very satisfying, as I said before, to work with students, to be able to engage them and to see them kind of work through some of their emotional issues that they have at the time because of being in lockdown or because of the pandemic. So music is our first language. It's a way of expressing our emotion, and it's one thing to listen to music, very important to listen to music, but also really important to be able to perform and for all students to have the opportunity. And I'll be talking later on about various web tools that we could use to help students have access to good pedagogy anywhere where they are. So it's really important. For me, I was very lucky. I had a lot of music in the background. My mother was an amateur pianist. She used to sight read a lot. She never practiced, and I can talk a lot about practice is usually a good idea, not always a good idea. But one of the things was there was always music in the background, and looking back, thinking about this for the interview, that there were certain pieces they would play, especially my mother when she was feeling sad. She would often play the Brahms Clarinet Quintet, and I associate that piece even today with a certain mood. Or if she's feeling more upbeat, she would play Archduke Trio or something like that. So music expresses emotion particularly well, and it's really important to allow all people, to provide access for all people to be able to express that emotion.
Wow. So why did you choose the violin and not the piano?
Oh, it's interesting. I just liked the sound. I think it was my sister played it. She doesn't play it anymore. She's a musicologist. She works in music history, but she doesn't play anymore. But she was my older sister. Maybe I just liked the sound. It's very interesting. But talking about practice and things, why a lack of practice is not always a bad thing. That's a fascinating photo for me, because I was a very not engaged as a practicer in my school years. But looking back, there were many things I did that actually supported violin playing later on, when I did finally decide, okay, I really want to get on top of this violin thing. And when I began to work, I had to work really, really hard, because I hadn't been a very hard worker in my teenage years. But this is slightly younger by the looks of things. But coordination that we can learn in all sorts of ways, by playing ball games, by playing pool, is a very important part of being able to help young students develop coordination on the violin. I
Yes.
once worked in Finland, and the Finnish approach to music education is one of the best, I think, in the world. And they've gathered a lot of material from the Soviet Union. They're right next door to Russia, as we all know. And in the Soviet time, they did a lot of research into basic coordination exercises. And I think that's something we can also explore of ways of helping young students to play. So it's just interesting for me to see this photo, that concentration on angles or whatever. Yeah. So other things we can do for informal practice, we don't, juggling is something we've done quite a lot of research on here in Melbourne, and juggling is a very useful thing, often for the beginning violin student, to help basic coordination.
Oh, wow, juggling.
Juggling, yeah, it's quite easy
Wow.
actually to juggle. I can't juggle myself, but we think of something as complicated as violin playing. Juggling is quite easy, but it's also very useful for them to learn.
So, other than juggling, are there other practices that are used to train the coordination?
Oh, absolutely. So the big thing about the violin, to a lesser degree the piano, all string instruments to a lesser degree the piano, is that the bow in the left hand, let me just get my angle, the bow in the left hand are, of course, having to work constantly together and having at
Yes.
times very different tasks. So at times when we're playing very fast, we have to use a very small amount of bow, or when we're shifting, we're trying to coordinate with the bow stroke. So
Yes.
it's a lot of things to do with the midline. Let me know if you can't see. There's all sorts of exercises where we use the arms going in various patterns and the head goes in various patterns, and you can't see my legs, but I'll have a pattern with the legs. It's a very interesting topic. I don't think we've nearly developed it enough. It
Oh,
exists in all sorts of associated professions, like in dance, in certain kind of performance art. But I think we could really draw a lot of these things into violin teaching. It could be very helpful. As we know, the early stages of violin playing are pretty hard going. The violin in the early years doesn't sound that wonderful. So anything we can reduce the effort that's needed to get those basic issues, those basic skills organized, is a big benefit.
wow. So, would you say the piano is easier than the violin?
I definitely say that, but I'm not a pianist. There's definite issues. One of the hardest things for anyone to do is to play a melodic line on the piano. I love the piano. I love listening to late Beethoven sonatas. You listen to people like Barenboim, one of my favorite pianists. Even Glenn Gould playing Bach. The ability to play a melodic line is astonishingly hard. A convincing melodic legato line, which for us is our bread and butter. We do it all the time.
Yeah.
But actually, there's so many other issues that we have to cope with. Yes, I would say overall the
Yes.
violin is more complicated for the student than the piano.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, when did you work hardest as a student?
Well, after having spent quite a bit of time wandering around, shall we say, as a teenager, I finally decided to be very serious about it. This is a picture, very interesting with all the hair. Just as I arrived in Germany, and I didn't intend to study in Germany, I just ended up there following a teacher who I didn't end up studying with. So my advice to any young student that is wanting to travel is somehow try and get there, and try and get there and just listen, to go and watch teachers. You don't know necessarily who the best teacher for you will be. And I found this to begin with, Helfried Pfister, not a famous teacher. He was the assistant to a very famous teacher, Osm, who I also had some lessons with. But he wasn't a famous teacher at the time, but just a a wonderful, patient, organized, focused teacher. And I am very owe him a lot of gratitude for just guiding me through a lot of that basic stuff in a very short period of time, very organized. So, as I said, I wasn't particularly hardworking as a teenager, but when I went to Germany, I definitely was hardworking. So that was the time, slightly later than some people, but as I'll often say to students, you need to work out the right time. You need to do the work. Everybody's heard of 10,000 hours. It's a cliche, I know. But we do need to do a good 5, 8, 10 years really concentrated work at some stage in our life. And
Yes.
you could often say it's good to do it when you're young. Yes, if you're focused when you're young. But if you're just going through the motions, if you're not really engaged, well, then it's not very useful work.
Yes,
So
yes.
when we say 10,000 hours, we need to remember that it needs to be what we call deliberate practice. Practice with focus, practice with motivation coming from the student, not motivation from you must do this.
Yeah.
Because when a teacher's doing that, the student doesn't really develop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So while during your hardest, like when you were working your hardest, what technique or what what was the hardest thing to do during that time?
Ah, no, that's a very good question. That's a very interesting question. Um, Many things. One of the skills, let me just break it down into skills. You could say violin playing as a whole, we reduce it if we just talk about skills. So I often say to some students, they get very fixated on, say, left-hand pizzicato or upper staccato. And I said, well, some of the greatest players of all time didn't have very good upper staccato and terrible left-hand pizzicato. You can do it, but if you just talk about violin playing in terms of upper staccato, then you're really missing the point. But without reducing it too far, I remember studying Sautier, and I studied it in Germany, and I wasn't really happy. I didn't feel really on top of it. I looked at it again with my teacher in DC, and then I came back and I joined the Melbourne Symphony, and after about 2 years playing there, we were playing Midsummer Night's Dream. So for the orchestral players, I'll know there's this. It's very quiet. It's a mid-tempo Sautier. It's actually quite tricky, and it's kind of very fiddly for the left hand. And I suddenly thought, this is after studying for many, many years, I can't really do Sautier. I don't really know what I'm doing. So I went then on my own journey, kind of investigating all the basics of it. And it's a very, very interesting thing to do. So what was the hardest thing? The hardest thing was just finding the actual study was wonderful. I can't think of anything that was hard about it. Just working about when to come home, when was the right time. Sometimes it's hard to live away.
Wow.
Yeah, so in terms of the study was wonderful.
Okay, so who were some of the most important educators for you over the years?
Yeah, well, I already mentioned Helfried Pfister, a wonderful teacher. Christoph Poppmann, I didn't learn from for very long. He's a wonderful musician from the Cherubini Quartet. It's wonderful to learn from a quartet player. They always bring different aspects to music making. He also was one of the first teachers to introduce me to Galamien. It seems amazing to all you young students out there that Galamien at one stage was relatively new, and the Galamien scale method, which I think is a wonderful scale method. The Amadeus Quartet, a very famous quartet. They were very famous already back then. And again, we had quartet lessons with them. Everything in Germany was just free. You just turn up. It was wonderful. Yeah. And Robert Gerler, my teacher in Washington, is a wonderful player himself, but very interestingly, he almost never brought a violin to lesson. He would only talk. That was, for me, totally fascinating. So it wasn't demonstrating, do it like I am. He would always say a version of, what are you trying to do there? I'm not convinced with that bit. And he was very reflective, very philosophical. It was Maybe not
Wow.
so good for the younger student, but it was fantastic for me. And his book on practicing the violin is a wonderful resource covering a lot of basic material about how to practice the violin.
Wow. So, what can we do to help develop a high quality education for everyone?
Yes, it's a really interesting thing because at the moment, worldwide, really, maybe Germany is surviving. There's cutbacks in the university systems. The pandemic has created problems for all sorts of university systems, and one of the first things to be cut are pedagogy classes. And if the young students going through their bachelor degrees and master's degrees are not getting good pedagogical training, well, we shouldn't expect them to be good teachers. We don't expect a doctor to know what to do just by kind of studying chemistry at the university. They need a massive amount of practical help. They need supervision, online supervision, and physical supervision.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've been doing now for the last 20 years really is doing a lot of initially DVD material and now of course web-based material, but trying to use technology. Technology can be negative, of course. Technology can be very limiting if people get too obsessed with the recording, you know. I'm not as perfect as Hilary Hahn. Well, maybe you're
Yeah.
not going to be. There's other things in life to find their own artistic voice. But technology can also be incredibly useful as a tool for helping students learn and for teachers, for young teachers or teachers who are needing to do some professional development. So I'll just take you, just a recent one, I'll just take you, yeah, I'll go away from that photo. So I don't know, can you see the Sevchik there?
Yes, I
Yeah,
can see very clearly.
yeah. Okay, so this is just a recent website that we just put out. Two of my students who've been with me for a long time, and they've just moved to Los Angeles to study at Colburn School, but actually, because of the pandemic, have come back. They're having a few lessons again. But just the wonderful thing about online tools such as this, and there's many good things, is I'll just play a little bit of this variation. So first of all, you've got a little clip. The Sevchik Opus 3, 40 variations, wonderful little studies, often to do with how to lift the bow. Very, very detailed markings from Sevchik. So this is just variation 38. Okay, so the variation goes on like that. So that's wonderful to begin with for a student to be able to see it played. You've got the camera angle. We often use close-ups to get quite in, to just see what the style of it is, what the basic musical line. But of course, we can go through it. We just have space for as much text as you want. Try not to write too much text because the video is very important. So just talk about the basic technical challenges. Since the spiccato's in triplets and it's got these string crosses, talking about ways to practicing that, talking about what we need to do with our bow hand, talking about the basic spiccato stroke, talking about making sure the left hand, as we're talking about with coordination, is ready. So that's
Wow.
an incredibly useful thing about this. So another very useful thing about these web-based technologies, so I'll just play another variation. This is variation 9. Good. So there's a number of skills there. Again, we have the text here with various descriptions of that. But
Oh,
down the
wow.
bottom, we have links. So if you click on the links, it takes you to further information just talking about the basic things. So apart from, say, the variation 9, then we can film all these. As I said, there's a close-up of variation 9, these supporting videos for the,
Oh, wow, okay.
yeah. And then we talk about bow division, so in the zigzag bowing. So I do a lot of these. Practice your bow division on the open string. And so there's just demonstrations for how to practice these things, and then you go into how we use this in other repertoire, not just in the Sevchik, so in, say, the Bach D minor Allemande. Use a sticker to practice your recovery bow stroke on an open string. Make sure the slur begins around the sticker. And it goes on like that. And I'll just show you before I leave the Sevchik. So some of these links that we put in, it takes to other material, because initially we recorded a lot of this on DVD. DVD is now very clunky technology. I mean, it was wonderful in its time. You have to get out the new DVD and put it in. But if you're talking about, so this one here, so then that basic bow, what we call mixed bowings, combining slurs and separates. So if you just click on this link at the bottom, it takes you to another one of our websites. And there's just your mixed bowings.
Whoa.
2 notes slurred and 2 notes separate. So a different exercise. And before we leave it, for those of you who haven't worked on the Sevchik, or I'm sure everybody teaches the Sevchik Opus 3, they're very beautiful little studies. And I'll just let this one run for a bit longer, because it's really important to get them to develop their musical line.
Oh,
So often they're in very conventional phrases of 4-bar, 8-bar phrases. He won't give any dynamic markings. Often he doesn't give any dynamic markings or character markings. But they're very, very important to say to the student, okay, go away and work out the phrasing. Put your brackets in. What's the first, how long's the first phrase? How long's the second phrase? What a surprise, the third phrase is twice that length. Put in your own dynamics. Where are you going to take time? So I think that's really important for us to be able to use these things, especially it's been an absolute godsend in lockdown, of course, because I've been getting students to do a lot of listening, but say if you're working with a student on Sautier, for instance, you could say, okay, on Zoom, show me what you're doing with your blah, 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 your kreutzer or whatever, and then look at the Sevchik Sautier variations, and then you could do this all. It's just so easy to have it all there on the computer. So I think it's terrific.
wow. Yeah, it's very detailed. Everything was very good.
Yes, it needs to be detailed, otherwise, just like anything you write, it needs to be detailed, yeah.
Yes. So we're talking about technology. So what do you think are the good and bad things about using Zoom technology?
Well, it's the best that I've found. I'm sure we all basically use Zoom. Skype seems to me, and FaceTime, they're much more limited. But look, the sound, it's very, very hard to tell character of sound and resonance of sound. One of the things, I try and turn everything into a positive. One of the things, if you say to the student, I'm not very clear about your musical line there, and they say, well, I think it's this, and I get them to sing, and I say, well, I don't hear in that violin playing. Show me with your bow division. So pick one thing like bow division and say, I can't hear your musical line, show it to me. Okay, I still can't see it. Show yourself in the camera. One of the things about certain students is they are very computer focused, of course, sometimes far too much screen focused. They're always looking at the screen. But once they do something in the camera, it seems to go through into their brain much more clearly than, say, looking in the mirror. So, yeah, the sound is not great, but we can find a way around that. Sometimes intonation is hard to hear, but then again, I say, okay, what's the intonation like there? I didn't think it was that great, but you tell me about it. So putting the responsibility onto the student. So, look, it's been wonderful to be able to keep working in this time, and it can be a wonderful tool. It will never replace a face-to-face lesson, but it can be a wonderful support to the face-to-face lesson. I've done a lot of group work this time over Zoom, and I think I'm still going to do quite a bit of group work on Zoom, even once we've got the vaccine and we're all back to normal face-to-face. So I think we're very lucky to have it.
Wow. Okay. So so knowing what our JPO, our orchestra, is doing, so do you have any thoughts, any advice regarding the activities that we are doing?
Oh, I think it sounds absolutely fantastic. It's a wonderful thing. I mean, you've got wonderful people there with Yap Ling, kind of really strong musicians, kind of intelligent musicians, with a broad outlook. So I think that's a wonderful thing to do. I'm very impressed with the scholarship program, as you're talking about. You know, the topic music for everybody. Well, this is a very practical way of trying to help people that normally can't afford it. We often see music as a luxury. This makes me very cross because a lot of things can be a luxury. I mean, if we couldn't eat, we wouldn't have time for music lessons. But if we can eat, then it's no longer a luxury. It's part of our cultural, social, and emotional life. So I think it's a wonderful thing to have the scholarship program. It sounds terrific.
Wow. Okay, so I think we will move on to the Q&A session right now.
Yes.
So I'll start by asking a question. So just now you say maybe like after the vaccine has been found, has been made, and then you will still sometimes go back to Zoom, right?
Yes.
Why is that so?
Okay, so one of the things, especially the younger student, a negative of society, and from my memories of Malaysia is exactly the same there, is students spend more and more time in formal education, say morning school or afternoon school, and then tutoring, and then homework, and then actually school has its place, but a lot of learning doesn't necessarily happen in school. So in
Yes.
terms of music, one of the things that all musicians need is to have kind of a rich background, a rich oral map, we can say. If you don't, I constantly say to students, if you don't know the late Beethoven piano sonatas, well, you don't really understand what it's like to play, say, the slow movement of the A major, number 6, our violin sonata. You don't really understand those things. You need to listen much more broadly than you play. One of the huge advantages of Zoom is it's a very, very convenient way. I always do a listening test. So if I'm running a group class, I get it ready to play and we all talk about things, and then I run a technique class. Actually on Zoom you can do a certain amount of technical work together, like the Galamian scales. So one person can go up da dee 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 dee, and then they go up and down, and the next person goes da dee 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 dee, and the next person da dee 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 dee. We all know that. So you can actually do a certain amount of technical work on Zoom, but the listening is terrific. I do a listening test. I set them things to listen to, and especially depending on the age of the student, they can be quite competitive about who gets the right answers for the test. It can be a really, really useful thing. Um, so I'm definitely going to do some group. I've always done a certain amount. Um, but for some people that say fly, if you think of flying to Melbourne from a regional area or a 4 or 5 hour drive, well, sometimes that's just necessary, but maybe it isn't always necessary. Maybe Zoom can actually provide quite a good substitute for many of those weeks, because everything else we do takes time and it takes energy and it's also tiring.
Yes. Okay. So moving on to the next question. So, hi, Mr. Fintan. You mentioned that music for a lot of people is a bit like their first language. So, what would you say the main differences in between music and the actual language that we speak?
Oh, no, that's a very good question. um, Music, I mean, we can call it the first language. Um, Music is at a deeper level than a lot of, for many of us, let me put it this way, for many of us, music is at a deeper level. So often people that feel they can't express certain emotion in words can find that emotion, and it can be very fulfilling for them to listen or perform music. So if you think of some of the very, for me, some of the adagio movements of the Mahler symphonies, with someone like a Bardo conducting, some of the very, many of you will know Shostakovich Eighth Quartet, those kind of in the fourth movement there. Some of those things, you can try and describe what's happening in words, but the emotion of the music is functioning at a very deep level. And so, getting back to the question, literally it's a first language because we sing to our babies, and a lot of emotion is expressed through our singing, and they become incredibly aware of our voice and the nuance in our voice. You know, how are we feeling? And there's been a lot of research about this. So
Yes.
language can be just an analytic thing. So we can express information through language, but of course, great artists make language much deeper than that. But for me, I would say music even goes a step further in being able to express emotion. But you know, I mean, if you go to a wonderful play or you read a wonderful novel, I mean, we're also talking a very sophisticated version of expressing emotion too.
Yes. Okay. So moving on to the next question. Hello, Mr. Finton. Would you allow your students to do heavy lifting exercises like carrying weight? So, what is your opinion on this?
Very good question. Very good question. So, well, it depends what you mean by heavy. I've only been doing weights for about 10 years, and I don't lift very heavy weights at all. But to me, the research is completely clear. And as a background to the question, it's very good that you're thinking about this. Musicians can be very conservative. They can say, all I need to do is practice. I must practice. I must practice. Oh, this is hurting. I must work through the pain. And if you think of people, there's lots of people that work at an elite level, say an elite tennis player. What does a tennis player have? You know, she has a physio to go through all the exercises. They work in the gym. She will maybe have a psychologist to help focus in performance. She may do lots of other things away from the tennis court, and we can really learn from that. So I go to the gym. I used to go to the gym before. We've got some weights at home. Be very careful with the amount of weight, and everybody will say build up slowly. And you're allowed to feel that the muscle is kind of slightly under stress or whatever, and that's absolutely fine, and it can help build resilience in the body. In general, it's a very, very good thing. Try and have a day off in between doing weights, and aerobic stuff is also very good. But yes, yes, I would definitely encourage students to move, to go to the gym when they're at a right age, and they need to be supervised for a while so they don't try and lift too heavy weights. But really important is for them to move. Often if they're spending the whole day on the computer, they don't dance, they don't run, because of a lot of what we do, the movement here, it has to be supported by the body. So if they're stiff in the body, it's very hard to move with freedom in the arms.
Yes.
So moving is incredibly important. Good question.
Okay, so from an anonymous person, I am curious to find out what would you say is more important, the left hand or the right hand for you?
You could say we're going back to the body-mind split. Descartes, remember, what's more important, the mind or the body? I would say we can't separate the two. It was a big debate when we first started to make the DVDs. We didn't have room on a DVD to do both. So we said, okay, we're going to do violin bow technique. We're going to do the right arm. So I suppose if I had to pick one, I would say that's the more difficult thing to work on. But of course, they're always working together. They have to be integrated together and they're coordinating together. Okay, so the things you could say in terms of the left hand, the tasks are relatively simple. So finger fall, shifting, crossing strings, vibrato. Right? That's very glissando. That's a very, very simplistic version of it. But then if you go through the bow, it's, 10 times that list. And then when you get to something like tone production, you could say, so intonation, we work on all our life. Tone production, we work on all our life. You could say there's so many different variants in tone production that we need to work on. But so often the bow is more difficult for the student, and I suppose that's often what draws us to a great player. You could say, Jackie Bloggs, she plays really, really well in tune, but if that's the best thing you can say about her playing, well, you're probably not going to go back to her concert, okay? But you say, Jackie Bloggs, I just absolutely loved that second movement, that kind of sound. She got blah, blah, blah up there. So the bow is more challenging and more rewarding, but you need to work on both together, of course.
Okay. So what would you say are the main schools of teaching for the violin and viola playing? And would you recommend students to pick up different skills from all these different school of thought?
Yes. To me, the whole issue of schools has been breaking down. Look, we've had globalization for so long, and it's really intensified, hasn't it? But to me, we used to be able to talk about 2 or 3 Soviet schools of playing. There definitely wasn't just one Russian school, one Soviet school, but the whole of Eastern Europe was pretty closed, as we know, until the wall came down in '89. So it was possible, like Vronsky, a Polish teacher, was a very interesting version of that school. Maybe more interesting to me than the Oistrakh school, Yampolsky. But so there are these various schools, but I really think they're just breaking down to the point where, say, in Australia, your student will be exposed to so many different schools of playing. There's no Australian way of playing. There's no Malaysian way of playing. There's no American. We say American, but really, there's Galamine was a strong influence, but there's many different influences in America. A lot of Europeans went there. It's not really a German style of playing. I just think the schools are breaking down. But I think we, of course, need a very open mind. And I say to the student, and they're getting to that point where they're doing master classes with visiting people. That's another advantage of Zoom. With my youth orchestra, I had master classes. We give them master classes all the time. And I said,
Wow.
well, we don't need to have someone from Melbourne because they're going to be on Zoom. So we had someone from Cologne, we had someone from Seattle in the US, we had
Wow.
from all around, and that can work very well. So they're getting to that point where they're doing masterclass, I say, and they say, do this phrasing, and I say, well, I'm. This is the bowing you were doing before. This is the fingering you were doing before. This is the phrasing you were doing before. Listen to the masterclass person. Try it out. You mightn't like it. If you don't like it, don't do it. But try it out. So they need to expose themselves gradually to all thoughts of playing, not being held in one school. They need to learn one technical way to begin. So that's to do with their teacher. So what school am I from? I really wouldn't give it a name. I've had so many different influences. So even I studied in the States, it wasn't the Galamian. He was a Hungarian, and he was studied with Hubai. So we're really going back. So there's a lot of the teachers I've had. There's a lot of mixture already.
Wow. Wow. So, is there any exercises designed specially away from the instruments to help string playing?
Oh, massive number. Um, so let me just go through a few. But this is something if people want to set up some kind of email chain, people can feel free to email me and I can point them to a lot of material. There's a lot of material online. But just really basic things. So, the anatomy of the human hand and the difficulty with the third finger, and getting the independence in the fingers. And they're all different lengths. And, everybody's thumb is a different length. So we're all trying to play the same repertoire. We've all got slightly different hands. And we've all got problems with our third finger. And always our forefinger is too short. Always, always. So, just basic exercises, kind of independence exercises to do on the bus as kind of, students are on the way to things like that. Obviously very good for left-hand things, but basic vibrato exercises, a lot of these things. I'll just grab a bow. A lot of bow things. So the, issues to do with the forearm action, depending on how much you believe the energy of the stroke comes from the upper arm. But I'm saying if you're trying to develop a forearm action, that kind of bowing on the shoulder. Basic things to do with freeing up the movement. So basic forms of, as I was saying before, coordination exercises can be very useful. And all these can then need to be applied directly to the instrument. So all the way through the Sevchik, I talk about you practice the bowing pattern on the open string. Take out the variable of the left hand. We don't want to try and work on everything at once. Try and practice a passage without the bow, e.g. silently, so you can just focus on the left hand. So there's many exercises that, yes, if people want to email me, I can point them in the direction of those things. Very useful.
Wow, yeah, wow, it's amazing. So, this will be the last question for tonight. So, Mr. Fintan, I feel like the uniqueness of playing has been lost nowadays. Unlike before, where people can tell by just listening who is the violinist playing in the recording. Would you care to share your opinion on this?
Oh, I think it's beyond doubt, but it's just the society we live in, and we need to gradually encourage. I find it much easier now to just play what I want to play, play in the way I want to play, but it's much harder for the younger student. And to just encourage them to listen broadly and not to listen, they need to listen to themselves at certain stages and then not to listen to themselves at certain stages. Do a whole preparation for performance regime where They're not allowed to record themselves. They're not allowed to try and analyze what they're doing. Violin playing, we need analytic brains to become skillful violinists. That's clear. If the brain isn't constantly trying to work out how to solve problems, how am I going to do this better, then you won't get the skill level. But that skill level, that analytic way of approaching playing, isn't very good for performance. So we need to also balance that and switch that off. So I do get them to listen. I'll just do one last little share. Players like Szigeti. So Szigeti, I mean, he plays with a piano, say a lot of his Baroque music. Is it going to give it to me? Say the third movement of the Szigeti, of the Handel D major sonata. That's definitely not that. I've missed it, haven't I? Okay, so his vibrato was meant to be terrible. Everybody complained about his bow arm. It looked really weird. He's playing with a piano. We often still play Baroque music with a piano, I know. His tempos are considered too slow. He slides a lot. But everybody, you could complain about it. And if you listen to it, it's the most magnificent musical line. And his, just like with Glenn Gould or whatever, his sense of timing is just astonishing. So I get students to listen to people like Szigeti. I'll just play a little bit. Okay, need to stop. So
Wow.
I absolutely agree. I just think it's the world we live in. We can't change it, but just try and encourage them not to get too focused on only being clean. Try and get them to develop their own musical personality. Do a lot of reading of chamber music. They need to play quartets. They need to play piano trios, even some improvising to try and build their own musical personality. Good question.
Wow. So unfortunately, we're running out of time for this interview. So on behalf of JPO, we'd like to thank you very much for dedicating your time and energy into this interview despite the pandemic that is happening right now. And we would also like to thank everyone who has attended and supported this program. You guys have been great. So I hope you guys got the answers you wanted. And for those who are waiting for your answers, please stay as Mr. Murphy will answer your questions through the Q&A below later. So please check for the link at our JPO Facebook page and also our YouTube channel, Jesselton Philharmonic Orchestra Media, and stay tuned. So for anyone who's interested to share any of our program with your family and friends, it will also be on the Facebook and also the YouTube. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And now I will lead the prayer to end tonight's program. So please pray in whatever faith you believe in for the COVID-19. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your faithfulness in how you have guided and equipped people in their jobs and have provided in the past. It can be scary and overwhelming not knowing how bills and obligations will be met or to not be able to provide for families. As people feel financial strain during the uncertainty, Bring them comfort and peace, reminding them that you are there for them. Provide them in their times of need. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So that will be all for tonight. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Bye
Pleasure. Thank
bye.
you, everyone.